The Plantation That Still Owns Us. Chapter 1. The roots were never pulled. In the small southern town of Harper's Field, 18-year-old Elijah Carter stares at the ruins of an old plantation. It's the land where his ancestors were once enslaved, and the land his family still lives on, now in a run-down rented house built by the same family that once owned them. His grandmother, Mama Ruth, tells him, "They burned the fields, baby, but never the roots." Elijah often walks past the cracked stone gate of the plantation grounds, now tangled in vines and half swallowed by time. To outsiders, it's just a ruin, but to him, it's a reminder of how little has changed. At night, he imagines the ghosts of his ancestors walking with him. Sometimes he thinks he hears their footsteps behind him, whispering warnings. Inside their house, walls are thin and the floor creaks with every step. Mama Ruth keeps an old photograph on the table. Her grandfather, born into slavery, standing proud in overalls. "He worked their land for free," she tells Elijah, "and they still got the nerve to call us lazy." At school, Elijah's textbooks skip over the plantation era with polite silence. In town, people pretend the past is just history. But for Elijah, it's present. It's personal. Every time he tries to breathe freely, it feels like the air remembers. The land remembers. And so does he. One afternoon, while picking pecans from the tree near the edge of the property, he finds a rusted iron shackle buried in the dirt. He holds it in his hands and feels a strange mixture of grief and fury rise in his chest. Mama Ruth sees it, nods quietly, and says, "That ain't just history, baby. That's inheritance." Chapter 2. Cotton Shadows in Concrete Streets. At school, Elijah studies American history but never sees his story told. His teacher skips over slavery in 2 slides, quickly moving to the Civil War and Reconstruction as if it were a resolved issue. When Elijah raises his hand to ask about Juneteenth, the teacher shifts uncomfortably and mutters, "That's outside the curriculum." During lunch, Elijah sits alone at a table, writing poems in his notebook. The other students don't bully him, they just ignore him, as if he's invisible. He writes, "Cotton once picked by hands like mine, now grows in textbooks as footnotes and lines." After school, while walking home in a hoodie, Elijah is stopped by 2 police officers. They ask where he's going, what he's doing, who he is. He cooperates, but their questions feel more like accusations. One officer places a hand on his belt near his holster, and Elijah's heart races. When they finally let him go, he walks faster, fists clenched. He passes a mural of the town founders, none of them black, and beneath it a plaque that reads, "Pioneers of Progress." Elijah mutters under his breath, "Progress for who?" He gets home to find Mama Ruth watching the news, shaking her head at another story of a young black man killed in another city. She looks at Elijah and says, "You gotta walk like you don't belong, just to stay safe." The plantation may be gone, but Elijah knows its rules still run the streets. They just look like laws now. Chapter 3. Whispers from the Big House. Elijah visits the restored plantation mansion, now a wedding venue. The once decaying estate has been polished, painted, and turned into a romantic destination. White tourists walk the halls, sipping wine and snapping photos beneath chandeliers once lit by the hands of enslaved boys. A violinist plays softly in the background. Elijah walks silently, his footsteps echoing on the wooden floorboards. He sees the names of plantation owners on golden plaques, but not one mention of the enslaved. The tour guide refers to servants who helped maintain the household. Elijah clenches his jaw. The group is led into the dining hall, where a long, antique table stretches across the room. The guide smiles and says, "Imagine the laughter, the feasts, the family stories." Elijah stares at the silverware and imagines the trembling hands that polished them. He imagines the cook, a woman named Hester, who Mama Ruth once spoke of, who used to hum spirituals to keep herself from breaking. In the kitchen, he imagines the heat, the sweat, the whip. In the bedroom upstairs, he imagines a young girl, no older than his cousin, who had no say. The walls are thick, but he hears them. Voices, whispers, gasps. It's like the house is breathing with memory. In one room he lingers. He swears he hears a name in the walls. Elijah. Not spoken, but remembered. He stops at the staircase, places his hand on the polished rail. A cold shiver runs through him. He whispers to no one in particular, "How can you erase blood with flowers?" On the veranda, champagne is being served. A white couple poses beneath a large oak tree, laughing. The guide mentions that couples often choose that spot for ceremonies. Elijah remembers what Mama Ruth once said. That tree held more than shade, baby. It held secrets. He steps outside and notices a black groundskeeper mowing the front lawn. Elijah nods to him. The man pauses, wipes his brow, and nods back. No words, just understanding. Their eyes meet for a moment, and it's as if history speaks between them. Instead of leaving, Elijah walks the perimeter of the mansion. At the back, hidden from the guests, he finds crumbling slave quarters overtaken by vines. A broken rocking chair rests beneath a collapsed beam. He kneels and runs his hand over the cracked wood. "They kept the mansion," he whispers, "but buried the memory." That night, Elijah tells Mama Ruth what he saw. She nods and says, "They scrub the surface, baby, but they can't clean the soul of a place. It remembers, and so must we." He stays up late writing a poem titled "Whispers from the Big House." It's longer than his usual work. It's heavier. It ends with the line, "You changed the curtains, but left the chains in the foundation." Chapter 4. Still chained, just not seen. Elijah's older brother Marcus is denied a job despite being qualified. He had studied hard, prepared well, and wore his best shirt, but after the interview the employer shook his hand with a practiced smile and said, "We're looking for someone who fits our culture." Marcus knew what that meant. They always say it nicely. When Marcus tells Elijah, he forces a laugh, but the bitterness in his eyes betrays him. "They say we're free," Marcus mutters, "but we still need permission to exist in their rooms." That same week, Elijah's friend Devon is arrested for jaywalking and mouthing off to an officer. He's held overnight and charged with resisting arrest. Elijah visits him at the courthouse and sees the judge glance once at Devon's skin before setting an excessive bail. Devon's mother can't afford it. Elijah begins noticing the little things: how store owners follow him, how teachers talk over his words, how neighbors double lock their doors when he walks by. The chains are not iron anymore. They're assumptions, policies, and silence. At dinner, Mama Ruth places her hand over Elijah's and says, "You can't always see the cage, baby, but that don't mean it ain't there." That night, Elijah writes another poem. "We walk through doors they built for ghosts, / where smiles stitched tight with fear, / we're not in chains, but still, somehow, / we're never really here." Chapter 5. The auction block in our minds. In a haunting dream, Elijah stands on a wooden platform under a blazing sun. A crowd gathers beneath him, not with whips or chains, but with cell phones and checklists. A man in a suit reads aloud. 18 years old, intelligent, articulate, knows poetry, never arrested. Yet, bidders raise invisible paddles, naming grades, neighborhoods, and expectation. Each time someone bids, Elijah feels a part of himself being peeled away. His name is auctioned off, replaced with labels: at risk, urban, potentially angry. He tries to scream, but no sound escapes, only silence, deep, suffocating silence. He jolts awake in the middle of the night, sweat-soaked and trembling. The image clings to him like cobwebs. He walks to the kitchen where Mama Ruth is sitting at the table, sipping tea. Her eyes meet his and soften. "Another dream?" she asks gently. He nods. "I was being sold," he whispers. She puts down her cup and leans closer. "It's not just in the history books, baby. It's in the blood. They tried to sell us back then, and now they sell stories about us, who we are, what we are, before we even get to say it ourselves." Later that day, Elijah walks past the courthouse and sees a group of young black boys lined up in the hallway, all in uniforms. Some school, some orange. The line looks too much like the one in his dream. That evening, Elijah writes in his notebook, "They don't need a block anymore, / just systems dressed in suits, / but still I feel the hammer drop, / on everything they loot." He underlines the title, "The Auction Block Never Left." Chapter 6. A flag stained with blood and sugar. On the 4th of July, fireworks explode in the sky above Harper's Field. Families gather in the park. Flags wave. Burgers sizzle on grills. Red, white, and blue blankets dot the grass. But Elijah doesn't feel like celebrating. He stands off to the side, near the edge of the crowd, his arms folded as he watches a sea of smiling faces. He hears people chanting, "Land of the free," and wonders what freedom they're talking about. For him, the colors of the flag don't represent pride. They represent pain. He remembers the story Mama Ruth told him about his great-great-grandfather, who was forced to pick sugarcane during summers so brutal his hands bled daily. He remembers learning how enslaved people built the foundations of this country while never tasting the fruit of their labor. As he walks through the crowd, he notices how few people look like him. He overhears a child ask their parent why Elijah isn't singing the national anthem. The parent shrugs and says, "Some people just don't get it." Elijah hears it, loud and clear. He sits on a bench near the food trucks, watching families take photos in front of a giant American flag. A vendor sells red, white, and blue popsicles. A teenage boy wears a shirt that says, "America, love it or leave it." Elijah smiles sadly. "If only it ever loved me," he whispers. Elijah pulls out his phone and records a video. My ancestors were building America while yours were writing its anthem, he says into the camera. So don't ask me to stand for it when it's never stood for me. When he gets home, he uploads the video with the caption, "Independence for who?" It gains traction online. Some comment with support, others with anger. A few threaten him, but Elijah doesn't delete it. He lets it speak. The next day at school, a teacher pulls him aside. "You might want to think before you post things like that," she says gently. Elijah nods, but inside, he's boiling. That night, a classmate texts him, saying he was brave. Another texts him a flag emoji, and nothing else. He turns off his phone and walks to the porch. Mama Ruth is already there, rocking slowly, eyes on the stars. He sits beside her. They don't talk for a while. Then she says, "We've been bleeding for that flag for centuries, baby. Maybe one day it'll bleed for us too." He writes in his notebook, "They ask me to stand / for a song I never heard / in a voice they never let me use / I am the silence in their anthem / and I will not sing." Chapter 7. The overseer wears a badge. Now. It started with a simple family cookout. Elijah and his cousin Jamal were setting up chairs outside when a police cruiser rolled slowly down their street. No sirens, just presence. The officer inside eyed the gathering like a threat. Jamal whispered, "He's circling again." Later that evening, as the music played and the laughter grew louder, Jamal went out to grab a speaker from his car. That's when the officer returned, stepped out, and yelled, "Hands where I can see them. No questions, no explanation." Within moments, Jamal was face down on the pavement, handcuffed. Elijah ran out with his phone recording. "He's my cousin! He's just getting a speaker!" he yelled. The officer shoved him back and threatened to confiscate the phone. Neighbors started coming out. Someone else filmed too. Eventually the officer left, but not before warning Jamal, "Next time, don't act suspicious." The video Elijah posted went viral in their community. It sparked outrage and backlash. The next day, Elijah found a citation for a noise violation pinned to their front door. 2 days later, he was called into the school principal's office and warned about being a disruptor. Mama Ruth shook her head. "The overseer don't wear boots no more. He got a badge now, and he still don't like seeing us free." That night, Elijah couldn't sleep. He sat by the window, watching every car that passed. In his notebook, he wrote, "He'll swap the whip for a warning, slash the stable for a squad, slash but I still hear the gallop slash in the silence of God." Chapter 8. Generations buried, not freed. Elijah walks through the overgrown grass of the town's forgotten cemetery, a place where black families had buried their dead for generations. The headstones are chipped and leaning. Weeds curl around the names like questions never answered. He finds the grave of his great-grandfather, Silas Carter, and kneels before it. Mama Ruth had told him stories. Silas was born free but never lived free. He was a sharecropper who worked the same fields his father was enslaved on. Each harvest, Silas would tally his labor, only to be told he owed more than he earned. The debt was rigged. The freedom was fake. The land he worked never bore his name. Ligia places his hand on the cold stone and whispers, "They still using our hands to build their futures." He closes his eyes, imagining Silas bent over in the sun, back aching, hope wearing thin. But I won't die working someone else's dream. As he stands, he sees the graves of other Carter's ancestors who never owned land, never had their names on deeds, never got the promise of 40 acres or a mule, just sweat, just silence, just survival. Later, Elijah visits the county archives and finds the land registry. Page after page bears the names of the same white families from the plantation era. Not a single black name among the landowners. Still theirs, Elijah mutters. All this time. That night, back home, Mama Ruth sits beside him and says, "They kept us close to the soil, baby, not so we could grow, but so we could be buried quiet." Elijah writes in his journal, "They planted us, not to bloom, / but to forget, / but I remember, / and I rise." Chapter 9. Plantation Politics. The town's mayor, George Whitmore, is from the same family that once ran the plantation. His grandfather was a known segregationist, his father a banker who redlined black families into debt. Now, Mayor Whitmore wears a clean suit and shakes hands with everyone at Sunday church. But the power he wields hasn't changed. Elijah watches the mayor speak at a community event surrounded by cameras and clapping hands. He talks about unity, progress, and opportunity, but Elijah notices who gets invited to the front rows and who stands in the back. He notices the mayor's aides, all white, and the bank sponsorships behind the podium, owned by the same family lines that once traded bodies for wealth. Later that night, Elijah searches through archives and discovers old deeds and political donations. The same names show up: Whitmore, Langston, Bellamy. They owned slaves, then cotton, then banks, and now the town's political machinery. The names changed roles, but never changed hands. Determined to expose the connection, Elijah interviews elders, gathers oral histories, collects photos of houses once occupied by enslaved families, now owned by landlords who charge triple the market rate. He creates a digital map titled Modern Plantations, and it spreads online. He prepares a speech and signs up to speak at the next town hall. Mama Ruth warns him, "They smile in the light, baby, but they carry knives in the dark." At the meeting, Elijah stands up and reads from a paper he folded in his pocket 3 times out of nervousness. He speaks about the land, about the stolen labor, about the families still stuck renting homes on soil they once bled into. He ends with, "Progress is not paving over the past, it's paying its debts." Room falls silent. The mayor shifts in his chair. A few clap, others look away. Afterward, someone mutters to Elijah, "You're smart, son. Don't waste that by making enemies." Another shakes his hand and whispers, "Keep going." The next day, the mayor holds a press conference addressing misinformation spreading in the community. Elijah is not named, but everyone knows. That week, Elijah receives a letter from the mayor's office inviting him to join a new youth advisory committee. Mama Ruth raises an eyebrow. "Watch for the sugar that comes after you speak bitter truth." Elijah declines politely and publicly. He holds a follow-up community meeting at a church where residents share stories of denied loans, lost land, and silent shame. A mural is painted on the church wall, a large tree with roots made of chains and leaves made of names. That night, Elijah walks the streets alone, not in doubt this time, but in clarity. Mama Ruth hugs him and says, "You stirred something, baby." And sometimes truth don't clap back, it just echoes until it's heard. In his notebook, Elijah writes, "Their handshakes still hold chains, / their ballots still build fences, / but I spoke, and that for now is freedom." Chapter 10. Runaways still run, but now from schools. At a parent-teacher meeting, Elijah sits beside his aunt as the principal talks about his 10-year-old cousin Malik. "He's disruptive," the principal says. "He talks back. He needs discipline." Elijah leans in. He asked why he couldn't go to recess. That's not talking back, that's being 10. Malik had been suspended twice that month for asking questions, for defending himself, for not knowing when to stay silent. His classroom was a battlefield where black children were seen as problems before they spoke. The white kids got warnings, Malik got referrals. The difference wasn't behavior, it was perception. Later, Elijah visits Malik at home. The boy sits quietly on the porch steps, holding a book about astronauts. "Do you think I could be one?" he asks. Elijah nods, but inside, he's burning. The world tries to clip wings before they even know they have them. "You can be anything, Malik," Elijah says. "They just don't want you to know that yet." Later that night, Elijah helps Malik with homework. He watches how the boy's confidence has begun to shrink. Simple questions come with hesitation. He catches Malik erasing an answer before even checking if it was right. "They make me feel wrong all the time," the boy mumbles. At school the next day, Elijah walks through the hallways and watches who gets encouraged and who gets ignored. He sees Malik's teacher talking gently to another student who forgot homework. Last week, Malik forgot his and got a write-up. In the faculty lounge, a white teacher jokes, "He's got that little attitude already." Elijah hears it. He doesn't forget. Elijah decides to visit a nearby juvenile detention center as part of his college journalism project. What he sees breaks him. A line of boys, most of them black, sitting silently, wearing uniforms not much different from school ones. Their crimes? Disruption, defiance, truancy. The parallels are clear. The same system that suspends them in 5th grade prepares their place behind bars by 10th. Elijah interviews one boy, 15-year-old Kareem, who says, "They stopped calling me gifted in 3rd grade, started calling me a threat in 6th. He returns home, shaken. That night, Mama Ruth finds him staring out the window. "You all right?" she asks. Elijah nods slowly. "They're not just breaking us young, they're feeding us into a machine." That night, Elijah reads an article about the school-to-prison pipeline. He doesn't need the stats. He's seen the truth. He writes in his notebook, "They don't need chains when the desk is a gate, / when every discipline teaches you hate, / we run not from learning, but from how we're taught, / not from school, but from the way we're caught." Chapter 11. The Master's Voice in the Media. Elijah stands on the courthouse steps, surrounded by fellow students and community members, holding signs that read, "Justice is a right, silence is not peace, and we are not your headline." He steps up to the mic and speaks from the heart. We are not burning cities. We are building voices. We are not criminals. We are citizens asking to be heard. His speech is honest, passionate, full of history and heart. A local journalist records it all. That night, the news airs a 15-minute clip. It shows the crowd chanting, a sign being thrown, and Elijah's voice saying only, "We are not peace." The headline reads, "Student leader sparks protest turned chaotic." Elijah stares at the TV in disbelief. "That's not what I said," he mutters. His phone buzzes. Texts from classmates. Some support him. Others accuse him of starting trouble. Mama Ruth sighs. "The master still speaks, baby, just through microphones now." Elijah tries to respond. He posts the full speech online, but the damage is done. The narrative has already taken shape. The school principal asks him to step down from student council. A scholarship committee postpones his interview. He learns what his ancestors knew well, that truth can be buried under broadcast. In his notebook he writes, "They don't erase us with silence anymore. They erase us with sound bites. Cut the soul, keep the shell. That's how they sell the lie." Chapter 12. Reparations denied, again and again. Elijah joins a local grassroots movement calling for reparations. The group, made up of students, elders, teachers, and activists, gathers in community centers and churches, holding workshops, creating petitions, and organizing rallies. They speak not just about money, but about land, education, access, and acknowledgement. When Elijah speaks at a town forum, he says, "You took generations from us. You stole labor, lives, and language. And now you say compensation is too complicated?" His voice trembles, not from fear, but from the sheer weight of truth. Local politicians smile politely and say words like healing and unity, but behind closed doors, they laugh. One council member calls reparations backward-looking. Another says, "We can't be held responsible for history." Elijah thinks, "But we live in the house that history built." He finds an old ledger in the local library, one that listed enslaved people like property alongside livestock and tools. At the bottom, it notes the profit made from each life. Elijah photocopies the page and holds it up at the next rally. "This was theft," he says to the crowd, "with receipts." The town newspaper refuses to publish his op-ed. A radio host mocks the idea of reparations as woke fantasy. But still more people show up each week. Elders tell their stories. Teenagers write protest songs. A mural goes up downtown of ancestors rising from the fields. At home, Elijah tells Mama Ruth they say it's impossible. She replies, "They said freedom was too once." In his notebook, Elijah writes, "They paid for the soil with stolen hands, now they pretend the debt is dust, but we are the receipt that breathes, and we remember." Chapter 13. Freedom Papers, never signed. While helping Mama Ruth clean out an old trunk in the attic, Elijah finds a folded, yellowed piece of paper wrapped in lace. It's a letter, written in cursive so delicate it looks like it might vanish if breathed on. At the bottom, the signature reads, Josephine Carter, 1867. The letter is a plea to a Freedmen's Bureau officer for a parcel of land promised to freed people after the Civil War. Josephine had worked the fields as a girl, watched her mother be sold, buried her brother under a tree with no name. Her words, ask not for revenge, but for recognition. We built what you walk on. All I ask is something to stand on. Elijah reads the letter aloud to Mama Ruth. Her eyes glisten. She wasn't just writing to them, she says. She was writing to us. They sit together in silence. The weight of generations sits between them. Elijah traces the ink with his finger, as if trying to touch Josephine's pulse. Later that day, he visits the town's historical society, hoping to find records of a reply, but there's nothing. No follow-up, no mention, no land granted. Just silence. Erasure. A file marked Request Unanswered. Fueled by this discovery, Elijah spends the next week researching other letters from freed black families, hundreds, all pleading, all ignored. He prints them, spreads them across his dorm room floor, and reads them like scripture. That weekend he organizes a reading event. Elders and students take turns reading the letters out loud in a circle. Some cry mid-sentence, others can't finish. Elijah reads Josephine's last. We don't ask for what can't be given, only for what we were promised. That night, Elijah writes his own letter, not to the government, but to the world. He reads it aloud at a campus protest, standing under floodlights and open sky. My name is Elijah Carter, he begins. I carry names that were never meant to survive. I come from a people who signed freedom papers that never got read. So now, I write one that can't be ignored. He speaks of Josephine, of Malik, of Mama Ruth, of the land, of the lie of freedom, of the unpaid debt. He ends with a vow. I will not let your promises be buried in your silence. The crowd doesn't cheer. They listen, deeply, silently. Some cry. One elder walks up to Elijah afterward, presses a wrinkled hand on his shoulder and whispers, "You're the answer she waited for." In his notebook, Elijah titles the page, Freedom Papers Never Signed / but Still Written. Chapter 14. Ghosts in the Cotton Field. The sun is low in the sky as Elijah steps into the abandoned cotton field on the outskirts of town. The stalks are brittle now, dried and brown, but they still whisper in the wind. It's quiet. Too quiet. He walks deeper into the field, heart pounding, soil crunching beneath his sneakers. This is where his great-great-grandmother once worked, from dawn until dusk. Where fingers bled and backs broke, where laughter was rare and songs were survival. Mama Ruth had told him stories of this place, how the land swallowed screams, how the wind carried prayers. Elijah stands still and closes his eyes. Josephine, Silas, Emmanuel, Ruth, he whispers, names of his bloodline, names never written in books. As he says them, the air changes. It grows heavier, but not in fear, in reverence. He begins to speak, not as a protester, not as a poet, but as a descendant. You were stolen, broken, worked, silenced, but not forgotten, never forgotten. A breeze rushes through the stalks as if the land exhales. He kneels and places his hand into the soil. It's warm, soft, sacred. He feels something, a presence, a pulse. Not ghosts in the haunted sense, but memories. Alive, watching, waiting. Tears stream down Elijah's face, not from sadness, but from knowing. He carries them. He carries their unfinished songs, their untold stories, their hopes buried in furrows of cotton. That night, Elijah writes, "They died in rows, bent like roots, / now I stand where they fell, / I speak their names, and they rise, / not as ghosts, but as guides." Chapter 15. We're still on the land, but never own it. Elijah organizes a protest, not just a march, but a gathering of memory and meaning. He calls it a homecoming, but not the kind with football and parades. This homecoming is for the lost names, the lost rights, the lost futures. The field behind the old plantation house becomes the setting. Black families bring chairs, quilts, drums, and portraits of their elders. Someone sets up a speaker. Children run barefoot through the grass where ancestors once bent their backs. Elijah wears a simple white shirt, standing tall behind a mic on a wooden crate. The sun sets behind him, casting a golden halo. He looks out at the crowd, over 200 strong, and begins to speak. "We have lived in the house of ghosts, walked the paths of shadows, been told to forget and to forgive. But how can you heal what no one ever admitted was broken?" He talks about land, about labor, about how even now, in 2025, the Carter family pays rent to descendants of their enslavers. He talks about the school system, the jail system, the banking system, all modern branches of the same old tree. He holds up a deed to the land, a symbolic one created by the youth of the town. "This is not legal," Elijah says, "but it is truth. This is our claim, our cry, our calling." As the crowd rises in applause and tears, Mama Ruth takes his hand. Her voice breaks as she says, "You gave them something we never had, witness." Before leaving, Elijah kneels in the grass and presses the deed into the dirt. He speaks into the microphone one last time. "We are not asking for your permission to exist anymore. The plantation still owns the land, but it does not own us."